Nigeria oil and gas sector has been a thing of concern and actually growing concern over the years. And one might wonder: is it just the things happening or playing within? Is it just as a result of what Nigerians are doing, or do we have outside forces, impeding the growth of what's happening in the Nigerian oil and gas sector? So today we want to talk about how foreign interests are impeding oil and gas sector in Nigeria. And with us to talk about it is Nick Agule from the United States. Good morning.
I'm actually in the United Kingdom.
Okay, okay. You know the last time we spoke, you were in United States. I
Yeah,
hope it's not
correct.
the heat wave that is driving you around the world like this.
Not at all. This is where I live. Yeah.
Okay, so you're welcome to the show. Right now, talking about the foreign interests as regards Nigeria oil and gas sector, we want to understand. We want to hear your take on that regard.
Thank you very much for that question. Um, I would say that Nigerian oil and gas industry has always had foreign interest. Let us not forget that when we discovered oil in the 1950s, Nigeria did not have the technology, did not have the expertise, did not have the money to explore, find, and produce crude oil or gas. What happened was foreign interest, specifically Shade Deaki, came to Nigeria with their resources and they explored for crude oil in the Niger Delta. And that is how Nigeria found crude oil. And since then, the foreign interests have been in Nigeria producing crude oil for Nigeria and for themselves. So the biggest oil fields in Nigeria are actually being operated by foreign interest. So as we speak today in Nigeria, we have Shell, we have Chevron, we have Mobil, we have Texaco, we have Total, we have we have Ajib, we have all these foreign companies who are operating in the upstream sector of the Nigerian petroleum industry. And they started with joint ventures with the federal government and later moved to production sharing contracts when they were now going offshore in the shallow offshore or deep offshore. So the foreign interests have always been here in the upstream. It is only in the downstream that we don't have much of foreign interest in the Nigerian oil and gas industry.
Okay. There is also the introduction of CNG buses um, to the Nigerian world. How do you think this would affect the oil and gas sector?
This is what we should have done many years ago because by the proved reserves, Nigeria is blessed with more gas than crude oil. So if we got our national development plans and strategy right, we could have been using gas both for domestic, commercial, and industrial purposes while we produce crude oil, refine it, and then export petroleum products. If that is what we had used as an economic policy, today Nigeria would have been far developed than where we are now. So a gas is not only important as a cleaner source of energy, but is also the transition fuel between fossil fuels and renewable energy. That's what the world has come to to accept. So the introduction of CNG buses, I would say, is a right step in the right direction, even as it's coming late. That's what is needed. And of course, gas is cheaper, relatively cheaper than petroleum, than crude oil. So if you use gas in your machines or engines or vehicles, you will pay less than if you are use petrol or diesel. However, I have issues that the federal government is the one trying to drive this policy, because I don't believe that the federal government is able to do anything. Because the Nigerian public sector is bedeviled by corruptions and inefficiencies in the bureaucracy. So anytime we have government trying to achieve an objective, these factors are militating against that. I would have expected the federal government to offer incentives and create the enabling environment for the private sector to drive the CNG initiative in Nigeria, so that we can have better efficiencies and the rollout will be more seamless, and we'll be able to cover Nigeria with gas usage in our vehicles and engines in a shorter time.
All right. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, said a few days ago that the emergence of the Dangote refineries would disrupt oil exploration in the international community, especially the ones that Nigeria imports from. How much of that is positive or negative for Nigeria in the context of the sale of crude to Dangote in Naira?
Okay, so first and foremost, in terms of technical speak, when we say oil exploration, that is the act of looking for crude oil, just to find if there's crude oil in the ground before it is even produced. So the coming on stream of Dangote refinery to say that it's going to disrupt oil exploration elsewhere, I don't see how that is going to be the case. Rather, if Dangote refinery is unable to meet uh, their need for crude oil through local production, they are going to look further afield, maybe to Europe or to the US or even the Middle East, to get crude feedstock into their refinery. And that should be good news to the producers in those places, because they have a new market where they can supply crude oil to. On the other hand, Dangote refinery is a 650,000 barrels refinery. It's a big refinery. It's the world's largest single line refinery. And I think that's where, again, Nigerians need to understand that Dangote refinery is not the biggest refinery. There are refineries elsewhere that are over 1 million barrels per day capacity, but it's just that they have different lines within that refinery. But Dangote's refinery is just a single line at 650,000 barrels. That's a lot of production. And currently, at Nigeria's crude oil production, that is ranging anything, depending on whose numbers you are looking at, from 1.2 million to 1.6 million. The president said 1.7 million the other day. Whatever that number is, 650,000 is a huge chunk of that number. And Dangote refinery, given their capacity, are most unlikely to meet all of their crude oil needs with what is produced in Nigeria. So they are going to definitely have to look further afield to get their crude feedstock. On the other hand, also, at 650,000 barrels, what Dangote refinery is going to produce in terms of petroleum products is going to be too much for the Nigerian market. So again, they will have to look further afield for markets, for outlets to sell their products, because Nigeria is never going to be able to consume all of the Jet A1 that will be produced from Dangote refinery, or the diesel, or even the premium motor spirit, the PMS, which we popularly call petrol. So Dangote refinery, to me, needs to get their strategy right. There have been noises in the country in terms of they insisting that they need to get their crude from Nigeria's production. But that's not the way this thing works. If you look at refineries around the world, a majority of them, if not all of them, they source their crude from different parts of the world. So you cannot insist that so long as you have a refinery in a country, your crude oil feed must come from that country's production. Because you see, a lot of people might not understand that the crude oil that is produced in Nigeria does not all belong to the government of Nigeria. Like I did say at the start of the program, we have a foreign interest who are operating in Nigeria. And in fact, they are the ones that dominate the upstream sector of the petroleum industry. Upstream means the sector that is actually producing the crude oil. because Dangote is actually operating in the downstream. Downstream is where the crude oil is refined into products and then sold at petrol stations and all of that. That's downstream. Now, in the upstream, you have the likes of Shell, Mobil, Chevron, Total operating. When they get crude oil, they hardly even sell it in the open market because they have refineries elsewhere in the world, and they are taking their own share of crude oil from the Nigeria's production to those their refineries. So you cannot say that, oh, they should no longer supply their refineries somewhere in the world with crude oil they are taking from Nigeria and feed it to Dangote refinery. That's going to be difficult because they have already had these commitments. In the same way, Nigeria's crude oil has been committed to a large extent. So these are the conversations that need to happen. For me, it is surprising that Dangote, after launching his refinery, is up and about, more or less wailing and saying, oh, I'm looking for crude oil, I can't find it. I think that's a big mistake that was made by the management of Dangote refinery, because nobody commissions a refinery without first entering legitimate contracts for supply of crude oil. We're not talking about promises or what domestic crude obligation says or anything. A refinery will usually have contracts, firm contracts in place for their supply of crude oil. So these are conversations that Dangote refinery needed to have started like maybe 2-3 years ago, even in Nigeria, to ask the Nigerian government to say, okay, based on the domestic crude supply provision, can we enter firm contracts as to who is going to give us crude oil? If it is the NNPC, we need a contract in place. If it is international oil companies, we need the contracts in place. And if those contracts didn't sum up to the total crude oil needs that they needed, then they needed to now look further afield and sign contracts with other crude producers, maybe in Africa or in America or in the Middle East. And so that by the time they launched their refinery, their crude oil supply would have been guaranteed, and this noise would have become unnecessary.
All right. With the emergence of the Port Harcourt refineries, which the federal government has stated that it will come on board, do you think that we would have a situation like we used to have in telecommunications, where we have several telecommunications network providing services and you can switch, and then it will help bring the prices down? Do you think that will play out with that of the Dangote refinery also producing and the Port Harcourt refinery is also producing?
That is exactly what is needed. So you are right on the money. That competition is what drives economies. You know, you cannot have this kind of capitalist systems where you have businesses running for profit and there is no competition. If there is no competition, then consumers are never going to get the best deal. So what we cannot wait to happen is for Nigeria's 4 other refineries to start operating, and Dangote's refinery has start operating, so that they cannot start fighting for market share. You know, if Dangote refinery puts their petrol in the market at, say, 600 naira, and the Port Harcourt refinery is able to put their petrol in the market at 500 naira, we'll be buying Port Harcourt refinery's petrol, and that will force Dangote to probably bring their own cost down to 400, 450. Until we get to that point, we are never going to get the best deal as consumers, and we can't wait for all of these refineries to happen. At the end of the day, the refinery, the 4 refineries that are being run by the NNPC have a combined capacity of 425,000 barrels per day. And if we couple that with Dangote refinery, it means it's over 1 million barrels per day refining capacity. If all of that crude oil is refined, it will definitely need foreign markets, because Nigeria will never be able to consume all of those products. And that will also be good for us, because it will become a source of foreign exchange earnings.
Okay, there is something you said earlier, reiterating it, breaking it down for an ordinary man on the street. You said that not all crude oil in Nigeria belongs to Nigeria.
Yes,
How so?
absolutely.
Not all crude oil found in Nigeria belongs to Nigeria. How so? Can you explain further?
I'm very happy to explain that for the benefit of our viewers. So let me go back in time. Oil exploration started in Nigeria maybe way back, maybe in the 30s. But it was in the 50s that oil was actually found in commercial quantities. And what happened then was that the federal government of Nigeria and the international oil companies that came exploring for oil, the first of them to come was actually Shell. They entered into joint ventures. A joint venture is an agreement where parties come together and say, let us put money together and carry out an activity. And when money comes out of that activity, we will share it. So, like I can give you a very practical example. The shared joint venture has the federal government 55%, Shell 30%, Total 10%, and Agip 5%. So that is the 100%. So if they have a budget of say $1 billion to look for oil, the federal government will bring $550 million. Shell International will bring $300 million. Total will bring $100 million, and Agip will bring $5 million. That is how they will get the $1 billion. Then Shell is the operator. So Shell will recruit the staff, buy the equipment, they go in and they look for the oil. When they find the oil and produce the oil, say they produce 1 million barrels of crude oil per day, the federal government will carry 550,000 barrels. Shell International will carry 300,000 barrels. Total will carry 100,000 barrels, and Agip will carry 50,000 barrels of the oil. They physically carry the oil through lifting. So when they carry the oil, what each partner does with the oil is their own. The federal government usually will sell the oil, and then that is how we fund our budget. Then the international oil companies, that is the Shell, Total, and Agip, when they usually take their oil, they take it to their refinery somewhere in the world. I mean, Shell can take it to their refinery in Rotterdam or in Aberdeen or somewhere. The same with Total and all of that. So that is what I mean by the oil does not all belong to Nigeria. Now, something happened. Something. Let me just say the second one. Something happened. Nigeria started producing oil on land, which is what we call onshore, on land. And then later on, they started to see oil offshore, in the shallow offshore and the deep offshore. The federal government decided that they were not going into joint venture again because they were having challenges bringing money into the joint venture to fund activities. So they now entered what is called production sharing contract. A production sharing contract is what you call a sole risk. In that one, the federal government does not put money in the venture. The international oil company will use their money and look for oil. If they don't find oil, that is their bad luck. The federal government will say, I don't know anything about it. But if they find oil, then the federal government allows them to take part of the oil. They take part of the oil to meet the cost which they used in looking for the oil and producing it, which is called cost oil. Then what is left is what is called profit oil. That profit oil, the international oil company shares it with the government of Nigeria. So either way, you will find out that the oil that is produced, the producers themselves have a share from it, and the government of Nigeria has a share from it. So there's no way Nigeria gets 100% of the oil that is produced in Nigeria.
Thank you.
Okay, so how long is this joint venture? Is it supposed to last for as long as Nigeria exists? How long does this last?
You know, the joint venture does not last for as long as Nigeria exists. Usually the joint venture is based on the agreement that is signed with the government of Nigeria for that oil block. So what we are saying here is that if you form a joint venture and you want to explore for oil, you will need to go to Nigeria and obtain what is called an oil prospecting license, which with the PIA is now actually called petroleum prospecting license, because it is not just oil, you are also prospecting for gas. And then that license grants you the right to go and look for the oil and gas. When you find it, you will come back and obtain what is called an oil mining lease, which under the PIA is petroleum mining lease. So that will not grant you a tenure to mine the crude oil. Usually the tenure is like 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. At the end of that tenure, it is also renewable. The government can renew it. If the government chooses not to renew it, then that is the end of you with that oil block. And that will be the end of the joint venture interest in that oil block. So I hope I'm not confusing our listeners that the joint venture are the partners who want to do this oil exploration and production. That is different from getting a license to actually now do the oil exploration and production. So that license is the one that is tenured. So if the license is renewed, then the joint venture continues. That is the way it works.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Nick Agule, for your inputs. Thank you for throwing some light into some of these issues. We truly appreciate you, sir.
Thank you very much, and a happy day to our viewers.